Welcome back to another episode of Living with FASD, a podcast for those affected by prenatal exposure to alcohol, their loved ones and family, and for anyone else wanting to learn more about fetal alcohol spectrum disorders. I'm Patti Kasper, your host, your FASD coach, and I am bringing to you both professional and living experience with FASD. And today's guest is so very special. I want everyone to get to meet and know Jody Allen Crowe, who's been around this FASD scene for quite a while. And the topic today that we're going to be talking is a model of understanding the spectrum that's different than anything I've ever seen before. And I think it's fascinating, and many more people just need to have this frame of reference. So welcome, Jody, to Living with FASD.
I am just humbled and honored to be able to talk to you today. I honestly, this is just amazing. Thank you.
Oh, you're very welcome. Yeah, I just want to silence my phone a minute. I just got home, everyone. So hopefully the dogs will cooperate and not bother me too much. Mom, you've been gone all morning. So
my dog's laying right behind me, just loves being in the same room whenever I'm doing something like this.
Yeah. So your stages of FASD, there's 6 stages, right? From 0 to 5.
Yep.
And 0 would be 0 exposure.
Correct.
Right. So that's a nice, easy way to remember that.
Yes. So let me give you a little bit of a backstory. I'm an educator, and I spent the majority of my education working in schools where it was a high-risk population, and the communities were high risk. And I learned about prenatal alcohol exposure in my first year in a tribal school in northern Minnesota. A nurse came in and told us about this thing that I'd never heard about. And we saw pictures, and I saw academic profiles that fit what I was seeing in my classroom. So I just started at that point in time. This is before there was quick, easy access to information on the internet. So I was gathering anything I could find on prenatal alcohol exposure to learn, so I could be a better teacher for the kids that are in my classrooms. And in 5 years, then I moved on, became a principal. So then instead of just looking at a single classroom, I was looking at an entire school. And the school that I was a principal of, I was principal of pre-K, early childhood, kindergarten through 5th grade, 4th grade in one building, and then 5 through 12 in the other building. So it was K-12.
Yeah. Out of curiosity, how many, what's the percentage would you ballpark of the kids in your school were affected?
75%.
Okay. I
say that because I don't make my judgment based on certainly my observation, but the elders in the community telling me.
Okay.
I was getting firsthand knowledge of families and seeing not only the physical characteristics, but that's one reason why I started thinking in a different manner about prenatal alcohol, because I saw the whole spectrum.
Yeah.
So
I was just kind of, as I was listening to you, I was thinking about when I had Stephen Greenspan on a few weeks ago, and he talked about being invited to write write something. I think it was on autism. And he pointed out to the editors of the book, you need a chapter on FASD. And he was told, we only want to put information in this book that people will use. Teachers will never see this on a day-to-day basis. And his answer was, they see them every day.
Yes.
So
they see them, but a high majority of the teachers that I worked with had no clue until, and that's where I became a subject matter expert, because I knew what I knew, and I talked and trained teachers, I trained social workers, I trained psychologists because they didn't know.
Yeah.
But I had that firsthand knowledge, that firsthand experience. But the issue that I just got so frustrated with all of the names that were given to a kind of an elusive diagnosis. And there's so few medical professionals that would even try to diagnose something that was so elusive. The
So
reason
are you referencing,
because the definition of,
are you referencing the diagnoses that are under the FASD umbrella?
Right.
Okay,
So
like
you
the
have
ARND,
ARND, FAS, FASD,
partial FAS,
partial. I mean, there was just this whole, mishmash of names, and somebody would come out. It was almost like in religion, you have one denomination that calls something this, and another denomination that calls something this, and you just don't get a common understanding of what we're looking at. And so
I kind of like how they do it in Canada, right? It's all FASD, but with or without the sentinel facial features. That's it. Nice and simple.
There's another problem with this. The issue of not having a diagnosis, if you don't have the absolute knowledge, or the mother saying that she drank, or firsthand knowledge that she drank. And I just got so frustrated with the ambiguity in diagnosing an epidemic, basically. And there was so much pushback about, oh, you cannot say that about somebody because the mother hasn't said she drank during the pregnancy. But other people knew that she did, but how can you say that? You don't want to put that mother into that category, so to speak. And I understand all that, but I wanted people to know that this is an epidemic. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought, I want to use something that people understand. And my dad died of stage 4 cancer. And when somebody said he had stage 4 cancer, I knew what that was. If it had been stage 1 cancer, we'd have had a better shot at helping him. Stage 2, maybe not. Stage 3, stage 4, oh no. And I thought, there it is. People understand stages. And I do not get into the argument of did she drink or didn't she drink? I look at the behaviors and I say this, and I wrote a book titled The Fatal Link, looking at school shooters. And I had to have some way to look at every one of the shooters from a profiling standpoint and determine whether they fit the profile of a brain that is exhibiting behaviors of alcohol related, prenatal alcohol related brain-based behaviors. So as I was doing all that, I was realizing that there is a spectrum in the stages. So how can we say, put somebody in a stage, even though we don't know for sure that the mother drank, but the behaviors, the exhibition of brain behaviors fits that stage. And if in alcohol, in my work with kids, the behaviors the exhibition of brain damage behaviors in all I would argue with anybody to say please prove me wrong that these behaviors fit this category. So I don't ever determine or look at somebody and say they're FAS or FASD, because that takes some psychologist or psychiatrist or medical doctor to put that diagnosis into their file.
Right.
I look at it and say, I'm not going to talk about FAS, FASD, ARND, NDPAE. I'm just going to say they fit stage 3 of prenatal alcohol exposure. They fit stage 4 or unfortunately stage 5.
And really, I think I would agree that that's a very helpful framework. And we do relate to stages, you know, on a similar path. You know, my mother has Lewy body dementia. And when their loved ones are diagnosed with that, that's the first questions they start asking. Well, what stage? Because dementia, or Alzheimer's rather, has a nice kind of gradual but linear progression, which doesn't fit Lewy body. Lewy body is like looking at an EKG in terms of the decline. So stages they are helpful, but they are not, they don't fit everything, right?
Right. And in the case of stages of prenatal alcohol exposure, there is some movement in the stages, and that's if somebody moves from a stage 4 to a stage 5, if they die, and it's direct result of, you know, the physical issues that were caused by prenatal alcohol exposure. And but let me get back to the genesis of this. I would speak, and I did not choose to go out and speak at FASD conferences, except I was invited to speak at the international conference. And that's after I put a pregnancy test dispenser in a woman's restroom at a bar with a message on it, think before you drink. And it became, within a day, it was an international story. Within a week, it was a #1 trending story on Yahoo. And for the first time, I saw prenatal alcohol exposure on the front pages of newspapers and in the news. And that led me to working with the state of Alaska, and they did a 1-year study up there where we put dispensers in 10 different bars in Anchorage and Kodiak Island, I believe it was. A gold standard study. Amazing results out of it. Over 40 women got a hold of the researchers and said, thank you. I found out I was pregnant at the bar and I didn't drink. So I can kind of rest my legacy on, there's at least 40 kids up in Alaska that had, if no damage, less damage because their mothers found out about something.
Right.
But it was, when I'd go out and I'd speak, and I've spoken I was with Susan Rich over in Vienna speaking. I've spoken around the US and Alaska, but people I spoke at a lot of Rotary events and larger conventions, Rotaries, and the people that come up afterward and said, you know, my mom drank, you know, I'm okay. And I'd say, yes, you are okay, but you don't know what potential was taken away from you.
Exactly.
But you're still doing fine. And that's when the stages really started to solidify in my mind. My mother never drank. I know that I'm a stage 0. My mother never drank. But there's people in my family whose mothers drank. On my mom's brother married 2 brothers, married somebody who drank very heavily. And the kids fit all at once. It was like, wow, some of them are all right, but others are not all right. Where do they fit? And then kids that I worked with, where do they fit? And there's a whole, huge amount of people out there in society whose mothers drank, but they're doing okay.
Yeah.
They're not having troubles with, I put in there, stage 1 is no observable loss of potential.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you want me to share a graph I have,
Sure.
so people see it.
Let me see what I need to do to give you sharing rights.
Okay.
Okay, you should be able to share now.
I gotta get my. Can you see the graph?
Mm-hmm.
Let me see. So stage 0 would be no alcohol during the entire pregnancy. And I say the entire pregnancy because some people say, well, as soon as I found out I was pregnant, I didn't drink.
Yeah.
But there was still alcohol at some point in time in the pregnancy.
Yeah.
And stage 1 is
confirmation.
right. Stage 1 is no observable loss of potential. But the evidence, brought to us by researchers, very strong evidence that the ethanol in alcohol does damage, regardless of what fetal development level that child is at. So we don't know what type of damage occurred, and you might be able to function just fine in society, but maybe it's not IQ that has been damaged, but it may be the ability to function with the IQ you have, because the damage happened very early on in the pregnancy.
Yeah. There was a point that I can't remember who said it or where I read it, but it was talking about, FASD is, after all, a traumatic brain injury.
Yes.
Right? It's like a chemical IED in the brain.
Yep.
And when you have like a rehab facility where people go after car accidents or after strokes, the part of the assessment is determining their level of functioning before the insult.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where they set the bar for, we're going to see if that's where we can get the patient to return to that level of functioning. But with FASD, we have no idea where that bar would have been. That potential, we have no idea where that potential would have been had it not been for the alcohol causing a brain injury.
Yes. So then I look at stage 2 being prenatal exposure to alcohol with observable loss of potential, seen through an academic lens, through lowered math and reading ability and higher social behaviors. Now, remember, I'm looking at this as an educator. And educators, I would, when I'd speak, and I've been focusing on the business that I'm in right now for quite some time. But when I would go out and I'd speak, I would tell people, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a psychologist, I'm a teacher. Mm-hmm. Doctors see a kid for 15, 20 minutes in a doctor's office. Psychologists see a kid for, an hour of testing, minutes. if that. Psychiatrists see a kid for 15 minutes. But teachers see kids every day, all the time. They're the ones who observe the behaviors. And I call it academic and social and physical behaviors that they see. And each one of those can be impacted by prenatal alcohol exposure. So teachers are seeing kids who come from families and you say, what's going on? This kid just doesn't seem to have the potential. Mom and dad are, college graduates, and this kid's struggling with reading. What's going on? So there's stage 2 is where you see the observable loss of potential, but they still fall within the norms of a classroom. Struggling, they're in a chapter program, a title program, they're getting additional help. Their behaviors are skewed, and it could be one or both. It could be they're like I say it like the puppy dog eyes, the ones that look up to the teacher and go, just tell me. I'm trying as hard as I can, just tell me. Or the ones who are throwing fits inside the classroom because their brain is getting so wound up and tight because they're trying as hard as they can to keep up, but they release the tension inside the classroom. Teachers see this. The doctors don't see it, the psychologists don't see it, the social workers don't see it unless they're in the classrooms. It's teachers are the ones who see it, but the teachers are the ones who don't categorize or put people into these stages. They just say, this is a behavior I have to deal with. So stage 3 is where you have prenatal exposure to alcohol resulting in observable loss of potential in social behaviors at levels that may include interrupted school experiences. This is where Dr. Ann Streiskooth and her studies earlier on, listed a list of things that occur with what they would call fetal alcohol spectrum disordered kids. You don't see any physical deformities, asymmetry of the face, or physical attributes that are related to prenatal alcohol exposure, but you're seeing behaviors. You're seeing academic and social behaviors. This is the category where there's so many kids in our schools that are in stage 3, and they're struggling to stay in the classroom. They're being put into special ed programs. They're moving from one school to another.
Or sent to behavior schools.
Sent to ranches, or sent somewhere else during the summer. Their parents don't know how to handle them, but they look just like any other kid. I saw so much of that, not just in the schools, but as I started to become more recognized, with my work, I would have adoptive parents get a hold of me and talk to me about what's happening with their kids and how they've lost their friends, they've lost their church families, they've lost their neighbors don't want to have them around because they have an adopted child that's just causing all sorts of disruptions in their family and others, and they're the ones that had a better handle on this because they were functioning parents, and they may have other biological children, and they have 1 or 2 adopted kids, and they had a way to look at same environment, same type of behavioral expectations in the house, but a totally different outcome with the kids. And the ones that come from families where chaos is the norm, and they're the biological parent or parents of somebody who's stage 3, they just say, oh, you're just like your dad, or you're just like your uncle, or you're just like whatever. And they don't look at it from the lens that I was looking at it, from a exhibition of brain damage behaviors. But there is no physical characteristics that you can tie into saying, oh, that is a profile of a fetal alcohol syndrome child. So the stage 3 is what is typically known in the world as an FASD child. Stage 4 then is what we would have been known for a long time, is a fetal alcohol syndrome child. So you have the physical characteristics, as well as the academic and social behavior characteristics of a fetal alcohol syndrome child, which, as everybody knows, can be devastating for a child. But the difference is stage 4 kids get taken care of better inside of the academic institutions because there's an observable difference. There's
something that points toward that disability column.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
But so that's stage 4. And then the one that people don't want to talk about is stage 5. And stage 5 can happen prior to birth. Stage 5 can happen stillbirth, can happen with SIDS, and it can happen later on in life with organ failure. Yeah. Organ failure of somebody who has had a lifetime of issues with the damage that had been caused by prenatal alcohol exposure, and they can move from a stage 4 to a stage 5 upon death. So if you look at the picture at the top, you've got 2 little girls. They were both stage 4. At the time of this picture, I don't have the accurate data in front of me right now, but they were having multiple surgeries to repair prenatal alcohol exposure damage. And the one on the right, in 2012, moved from stage 4 to stage 5. The little girl did not make it. Yeah. But when she was born, she was a stage 4 prenatal alcohol child. So that, in a nutshell, is the stages of prenatal alcohol exposure. And when I explain this to people, I can't tell you how many people have come up to me afterwards and said, I'm a stage 1. Or I'm a stage 2 because my mom drank. The doctors told her to drink. And I struggle with things that when you started telling us about this, that's what I've struggled with. Yeah. And it was like an awakening for them to understand things that they didn't understand about themselves and were frustrated about themselves. Yeah. And they said, oh, and it's a non-shaming, non-blaming way of talking about it. Yeah. Because we're just talking about evidence of what alcohol did during prenatal alcohol exposure. Yeah. And that's you can't lie about the facts.
And I really appreciate this about your model, that it is non-blame, non-shame, and it puts the onus on the alcohol itself, puts it on the ethanol. I had that awakening or that epiphany similar to this when I was studying at Facets to become certified in leading people through the neurobehavioral model. I'm looking at all the primary characteristics and secondary symptoms as Anne Streiskuth and Diane Malbin lay them all out. And I'm thinking, oh, I do that. Oh gosh, I do that too, right? And I had an interesting conversation with my mom shortly after that. And I said, did you drink when you carried me? And she's like, oh yeah, every day. With such surprise in her voice, like, didn't everybody? That's not normal. But it was the early 60s and nobody knew any better then, right? But when I first saw your model, your stages, I immediately tried to put myself in there. And my early childhood photographs are they're few and far between, and finding one that's not smiling, they're harder to find. But there is suspicion that, if I journey somewhere to meet with a doctor who's trained in it, I might end up with the FAS diagnosis. But but I do have the confirmation of daily exposure throughout the entire pregnancy. And it has been formally diagnosed, that I am definitely NDPAE, but I think in some aspects, my eye openings are still, they're really small. So I don't know if it would have been full FAS or partial FAS, right? With all those little differences. But it's not so much in the IQ as it is the adaptive realm. But there are other physical things aside from the face. And so I would definitely put myself in there at the 4, because of all that. And yet academically, I did really well.
Mhm.
So it's just been such an interesting journey, and I really, really appreciated this model. And I'd like more people to think about themselves or their child, using this framework to see if it helps them come to some acceptance or some peace or see themselves differently, because that stigma is so real, and it's hard to get away from it.
And that's why I've stayed away from, the diagnosis language of FAS, FASD, ARND, and APE. I just say, let's just be honest.
Yeah.
Probably 50% of the population have been prenatally exposed to alcohol. I mean, if you look at the data, the people before the 1980s, they really didn't know.
Right.
So people were drinking because nobody told them.
Right.
And after the 1980s and even into today, it's probably still 50% because a lot of them are drinking before they know they're pregnant.
Yeah.
So then
and there are still some providers out there who go with one glass of red wine's good for the baby.
Right.
Which is really hard to fathom, but I'm thinking for at least some of them, they're thinking whatever's going to lower this mama's stress level is going to help the baby, because, help reduce all the chronic cortisol flowing through the placenta into the baby and screwing up their emotional thermostat.
I've given several years of my life almost full time to the prevention message. And finally, I just couldn't afford to keep doing that.
Yeah.
So, but I still talk about it. I still, am in communication with a lot of people about it. Jody Culp, we connect and talk about things, and I just want to express my sympathies to her and her family for the loss of their daughter. And she would fit this profile. So I'm thankful that I have an opportunity to speak about it. I haven't written academically about the stages of prenatal alcohol. I'm putting it out there for anybody to use. And Dr. Barry Stanley from up in Canada, he's been a good supporter of my work. Dr. Carl Bell, who passed away a couple of years ago, read my book, got a hold of me and said it was just on the brink of him finding out about all the kids that finding out about prenatal alcohol exposure. And he read my book, and he actually wrote a couple articles about my book, and we need to be listening to Jody Crowe and what he's talking about.
Because you're right, it has been and continues to be an epidemic.
Yes.
And with alcohol sales soaring by 40% with the COVID lockdowns, and that higher rate of sales not falling away, even though we've long since gone back to our previous ways of life. Those lockdowns were 3 years ago. Well, another 2 years, And all those babies are going to start hitting the doors to our schools.
Yep, in another 10 to 15 years, then they're the ones that you're going to start seeing evidence of that violent behavior not being able to be addressed with the people inside of schools. And it's
and that's why early identification is so very important. So we can wrap all those kids in services ahead of time. And I think perhaps the model you've come up with is a way that we can identify, who may have been those prenatal exposures and start identifying kids, because, right now it's 5% of the general population, 1 in 20, right? That's only going to go up. That's only going to go up. That's pre-COVID statistics.
And that's with probably 1 in 20 doctors even willing to diagnose. So when the DSM-5 was being prepared for release, I got an email from Dr. Ira Chasnoff, and he said, Jody, I took your book to the committee and it caused quite a stir. We spent all afternoon talking about it. So it could potentially be that I had some impact on the committee with my work when they came out with the NDPAE diagnosis in the DSM-5. So, but I'm just I was just an educator, a teacher from
there's
northern
no
Minnesota.
just about that.
Well, thank you. But I actually went to the University of Minnesota to a PhD, and I said, is there any way that I could get a PhD in study of fetal alcohol or prenatal alcohol exposure? He says, no, we don't have anything like that. He says, but you do what you've been doing, because my credentials was not in a university setting, but it was in a setting where it was almost a lab setting for prenatal alcohol exposure with a number of kids that in the multiple schools that I was at.
Well, again, it's such a fascinating way of viewing the spectrum. And I think that's one of the things that we forget about, right? So the stigma takes us just to look at the 4s and the 5s, but there are so many people who would be in stage 1 and 2 and even 3 that you're not going to see the violence. I think the most violent thing I've ever done is killed a fly or maybe a spider or two.
Right. And I tell people there's the vast majority of prenatally exposed children and adults do not perpetrate violence. But in my professional opinion, the vast majority of those who do violence, domestic violence, murders, etc., fit this spectrum. They have been prenatally exposed to alcohol. And if you watch, and I spend my free times watching, the real murder type of stories.
Oh, my husband loves those.
And I do that from the filter of what is the background of the person who did that violence. And I listen for clues, and you would be amazed. If you look at it with that filter, you'll very quickly start to see that a good majority of those perpetrators, the evidence starts to show in these types of shows. And in my book, I talk about a couple of ones that have the evidence of that type of a background. But it's sometimes I tell people I sometimes have a hard time sleeping with what I know, because I know that that it's such an epidemic that's a hidden epidemic.
Yeah. Hidden in plain sight.
Yes, right.
Yeah.
And many times right in your own family. And but with this stages, you can look at it from there and say, oh, okay, that's where they're at. It's not, there's no shaming or blaming, you're right. It's just talking about, exhibitions of brain damage behavior. And it's until you get to stage 4, you got the physical characteristics too, but the others are just the brain.
It's really kind of interesting as I was looking through your stages again this morning. The stage 5, and I had never pieced this, when I first looked at your work like a month ago or 2 months ago, it didn't dawn on me, but my mother had a miscarriage, either between me and my next oldest or between him and the oldest. It's like, I wonder. So
I'm not going to talk about my family, but the evidence is that stage 5 is more prevalent than you think it is.
Yeah. And it could apply to all the fetuses that, all the little people that pass before they even get implanted into the uterine wall. Those would all be stage 5s. Correct?
Well, that's a good thought. It's not that the fetus or the pre-embryo
the zygote
has been impacted with alcohol. It's the environment that they're in that's impacted with alcohol, because the alcohol doesn't get inside of that zygote or into the pre-fetus until the placenta is attached and the blood starts to transfer, and that's about 18 days. So prior to that, it would be the environment that it's in that could impact it.
Yeah.
And sometimes we had in one school, we had a girl talking to a teacher, and she said that her auntie was pregnant and was drinking that weekend, and then she was laughing because the baby stayed asleep until Wednesday. Well, in that case, the alcohol had went into the placenta, into the fetus, and the only way that the fetus can metabolize the alcohol is to pee it out into the environment, and then it re-drinks the embryonic fluid. So it's just recycling the alcohol. And so it might be a couple of days, depending on how much was ingested by the mother, because a mother their blood levels could drop, and there's some studies of that drop, and at the same time the embryonic fluid and has a high level of alcohol for up to 72 hours.
Well, I've recently read that it's much more accurate to, instead of testing newborns for toxic substances, alcohol, drugs, whatever, it's more accurate to test umbilical cord tissue. And that alcohol stays in the umbilical cord tissues for 40 weeks.
Wow.
20
well,
weeks.
there's no
20 weeks.
Yeah.
20 weeks, because that's 4 months. And that's, that's because there's no way for the umbilical cord to metabolize it.
Right.
So,
wow.
What does that mean for the baby? The baby, you get the liver developing toward the end of the first month, but the enzymes that are used to break the alcohol down don't come on board until toward the end of the 8th month. One of them, ADH, the other one barely makes an appearance before delivery. So, but ADH is first in the baby's brain. So,
I'm going to have to start keeping up on the new research out there. It's been a while.
Yeah.
my brain is totally focused on what I'm developing. But I just thank you and thank Jody Culp for thinking of me and
Yeah.
passing that information on. She wanted to know if my stages of prenatal exposure to alcohol could be used in some of the writing that several of them are putting together. And
I'm one of those 4.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And feel free to reach out to me and ask
Okay.
any more questions on it if you need to. And
Okay. I'd
but
appreciate that. So I can
thank you for
tell
this
you
opportunity.
now that it will be in, where is it? This is the first edition of my book.
Okay.
The second edition will be coming out soon.
Okay.
We haven't gotten it to the publisher yet, so I'm going to add these stages in the appendix, if that's
Well,
all right.
you absolutely have my permission.
Awesome.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, Jody, I can't thank you enough for carving out the time to come on the air with me. So this will go out either sometime in August or toward the beginning of September. I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I'm just excited to get people to have this framework, a new way of looking at it. I mean, even though it's been out for a while, I really hope to give you that larger platform to carry
Thank
your
you.
work on. So,
Thank you.
you know,
I'm honored. Thank you.
You're very welcome. Everybody, I can't believe our time is wrapping up already. We've been at this just almost an hour. And so I want to invite you, please like, share, comment, whatever you want to do in response to this. I hope this was valuable information for you. If you find that Living with FASD podcast has been beneficial to you, please consider going on over to patreon.com and joining the community there. Of course, there's level 1 is free, and as this podcast will always be free, but this podcast does cost me money to put out. So if you feel so inclined to join at the $5 level or $10 level or $15 a month level, or even the $15 is less than the cost of 1 cup of coffee a week. So it's not going to break the bank, but every little bit does help me with the expenses of putting this podcast out there, and I would be ever so appreciative. And there are a few little perks for those who do decide to bless me with the production costs. So, and again, you can find Living with FASD on Patreon, on Rumble, Spotify, YouTube, wherever that you listen. I'm so grateful that you've taken this hour out of your day, and I hope you have a fantastic week, and we will see you again next Monday. Thank you so much for joining us. Bye-bye for now.